"Ethan, son, come here." My father's voice, thick with pride, echoed through the cavernous living room of their San Diego home. I sat on the plush leather sofa, the kind that was too expensive to ever be comfortable, and watched my younger brother rise to his feet. Ethan moved with the easy confidence of a man who had never known a single day of doubt. He stood before our parents, his shoulders back, a polite, practiced smile on his face. My mother looked at him with an adoration that made my own heart ache, a quiet, familiar pain I had learned to live with. "Your mother and I have been thinking a lot about the future," my father began, his eyes fixed solely on Ethan. "About legacy, about everything we've built." He paused for dramatic effect, letting the weight of his words fill the room. I felt like a spectator at a play where I already knew the ending. "You, Ethan, have made us prouder than you can ever imagine, a natural leader, a success in your own right. We know that in your hands the family's foundation will not only be safe, it will flourish." My mother then stepped forward, holding a small velvet box. She opened it to reveal a single gleaming set of keys. "This house," she said, her voice trembling with emotion, "is more than just a building. It's a home. It's our legacy, and we want to give it to you." My father placed the keys in Ethan's palm like a king passing on a scepter. The gesture was so ceremonial, so final. Ethan closed his hand around them, his smile widening. "I'm speechless," he said, though he looked anything but. "Thank you. I won't let you down." The three of them shared a moment, a perfect family portrait of success and affection. I felt invisible, a ghost sitting in a room full of life. It was only after their embrace that my father's eyes finally found me still sitting on the couch. His expression shifted from pride to something more complicated, a mixture of pity and obligation. "And Liam," he said, his voice now lacking all its previous warmth. He walked over to the mahogany coffee table and picked up a thin, forgotten folder. It was covered in a light film of dust. He held it out to me, not with ceremony, but with a tired sigh. "This is for you." I took the folder. My hands felt numb. Inside was a single yellowed document, a deed. My eyes scanned the text, my mind struggling to process the words. 50 acres, Tennessee, Grandpa Arthur's old farm, a property that hadn't been touched in over 2 decades, a place synonymous with failure and decay in our family's history. It was a joke. It had to be. $1.5 million home for Ethan and a plot of dead soil for me. The message was not subtle. It was a declaration as clear as the California sun streaming through the window. Ethan was the future. I was a piece of the past they needed to discard. I looked up from the paper, my throat too tight to speak. My eyes met Ethan's across the room. He wasn't even trying to hide it. A slow, triumphant smile spread across his face, an unspoken confirmation of everything I had ever feared. It was a look that said, "This is how it was always going to be. You always knew your place." He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod, as if to thank me for playing my part as the family disappointment so well. I wanted to scream, to throw the folder back in my father's face, to demand an explanation, but all I could manage was a whisper lost in the heavy silence of the room. The drive home was the longest 20 minutes of my life. The luxurious San Diego suburbs blurred past the window, a beautiful world that suddenly felt alien to me. Inside my car, the silence was a physical thing, heavy and suffocating. Jessica sat in the passenger seat, as still as a statue, her hands clenched in her lap. She stared straight ahead, her jaw set so tightly I could see the muscles pulsing. I risked a glance at her. There was no sadness in her face, no sympathy. There was only a cold, simmering rage that was far more terrifying than tears. The air was thick with unspoken words, each one a shard of glass waiting to be thrown. I could still feel the weight of that useless folder on the back seat, a symbol of my worth in my family's eyes. I wanted her to say something, anything. I wanted her to take my hand and tell me it didn't matter that we were a team. "Jess," I finally ventured, my voice barely a whisper. Her head snapped toward me, her eyes like chips of ice. "Don't," she said, the single word cutting through the silence like a knife. "Just drive." So I did. I drove the rest of the way in that crushing silence, my own humiliation from my parents' house now being compounded by the icy rejection from my own wife. When we pulled into our driveway, she was out of the car before I had even turned off the engine. I followed her inside, my heart pounding in my chest. Our small apartment, usually a refuge, felt like a courtroom. Jessica threw her purse and keys onto the kitchen counter with a clatter that made me flinch. "So that's it," she began, her voice low and trembling with fury. She turned to face me, and the dam of her silence finally broke. "That's everything. After all these years of you working your fingers to the bone of us, saving every penny of you, swallowing your pride every time your family treated you like the hired help, your grand inheritance is a patch of dirt in the middle of nowhere." "It was Grandpa Arthur's," I said weakly, as if that explained anything. "I don't care whose it was," she exploded, her voice rising with every word. "It's worthless, Liam. It's a 50-acre monument to failure. Did you see your brother's face? Did you see how they all looked at you? They weren't just giving Ethan a house. They were publicly humiliating you. And you just sat there and took it. You said thank you. For what? For a pile of rocks and weeds." Every word was a blow. She was voicing the ugliest thoughts that were already swirling in my own mind. "What did you want me to do? Just make a scene?" "I wanted you to have some self-respect. I wanted you to be the man I thought I married. The man who had ambition, who had a future. I didn't sign up for this. I didn't sign up to be the wife of a broken farmer with nothing to his name but a family legacy of failure. That wasn't an inheritance, Liam. That was a punishment, and I'm not going to be punished along with you." She stood there breathing heavily, her face flushed with anger and disappointment. It wasn't just about the money or the house. It was about her vision of the life she deserved, a life she now saw slipping away. And in her eyes, it was all my fault. That argument wasn't the end, but it was the beginning of it. The seeds of our marriage's destruction were sown right there in the bitter soil of that worthless Tennessee land. The argument from that first night bled into the next morning, a wound that refused to close. The tension in our small apartment was so thick I could barely breathe. Jessica moved around me like I was a ghost, her face a mask of cold resolve. I had hoped that a night's sleep would cool her anger, that she would wake up and see me not the deed to a worthless farm. But I was wrong. The woman who woke up that morning was a stranger, one who had already made a decision. I found her in the bedroom, an open, empty suitcase lying on our bed like a coffin. "What are you doing?" I asked, my voice cracking. "I'm doing what I should have done the moment I saw that folder," she said, not even looking at me. She opened her closet and began pulling out clothes with a detached efficiency that terrified me. Dresses we had bought together for special occasions, sweaters I loved seeing her in, jeans from our first vacation. Each item she folded and placed in the suitcase was a memory she was packing away, a piece of our life she was discarding. "Jess, please just stop and talk to me," I begged, stepping in front of her. "We can't just throw everything away because of one bad day. This is us. We're a team." She finally stopped and looked at me, and her eyes were empty of any warmth. "A team. A team works towards a shared goal, Liam. Do you remember our goal? The 5-year plan we wrote together in this very room. We were supposed to be saving for a down payment on a house here in San Diego. We were supposed to be building a life where our kids wouldn't have to struggle. I have worked 2 jobs, I have given up vacations, I have believed in you and your potential for 10 years. I held on to that dream with everything I had." Her voice began to tremble, not with sadness, but with a deep, bitter resentment. "And what is my reward? The honor of being married to a man whose own family thinks so little of him, they give him their garbage. Your brother gets a future, a legacy. You get a plot of dirt. I will not have my future determined by their pity. I will not spend the next 40 years of my life watching my dreams rot in a field in Tennessee because you don't have the spine to demand what you're worth. This isn't about worth, it's about family." I shot back, my own desperation turning to anger. "It was my grandfather's land." "Your grandfather is dead," she screamed, the sound echoing off the bare walls. "And his land is dead too. I am alive, Liam. My dreams are alive, and I will not let you drag them into the grave with you." I was stunned into silence. The cruelty of her words stole the air from my lungs. I watched helpless as she continued to pack. She moved through the apartment like a storm, gathering her things, her face set in stone. She was erasing herself from our life, and I was powerless to stop it. I followed her to the living room, a silent, pathetic shadow. She had her purse over her shoulder and her suitcase handle in her hand. She was at the door, ready to walk out of my life forever. "So this is it," I whispered the words, feeling like ash in my mouth. 10 years. You're just going to walk away." She paused, her back to me. For a moment, I allowed myself a flicker of hope. Maybe she would turn around. Maybe she would see the man she once loved standing here broken, but she didn't. She turned her head slightly, her profile cold and sharp. "This isn't the life I signed up for, Liam. I'm sorry." Then her eyes fell on the folder on the coffee table, the deed to the Tennessee farm. She walked back, picked it up, and turned to face me fully. Her expression was one of pure, unadulterated pity. "Here," she said, her voice flat. "You're going to need this. This is your future now." And then she did something I will never forget. She threw the folder at me. It wasn't a gentle toss. It was a gesture of contempt. The papers fluttered out, the deed landing at my feet like a final insult. She didn't wait for my reaction. She simply turned, opened the door, and walked out, closing it firmly behind her. The click of the lock was the loudest sound I had ever heard. I stood there for a long time, frozen in the deafening silence of the apartment. The home we had built together now felt like a tomb. It was over. In a single day, I had lost my family's respect, my inheritance, and now the love of my life. I looked down at the paper on the floor, the deed to 50 acres of nothing. She was right. It was my future. And in that moment, I had never felt more alone or more worthless. For hours, I just sat there on the floor of my empty living room, the deed to the farm lying beside me. The silence in the apartment was a living thing. It was in the space where Jessica's laughter used to be, in the dust motes dancing in the afternoon light where she used to stand. I was numb, adrift in a sea of loss, so vast I couldn't see the shore. My family had cast me aside, my wife had abandoned me. I had hit rock bottom, and the only thing I had to show for it was a piece of paper for a place I never wanted to see. I was so lost in my own misery that the sudden shrill ring of my phone made me jump. I stared at it, my heart seizing when I saw the name on the screen. Ethan. A part of me wanted to ignore it, to let it ring until it gave up, just like everyone else in my life had. But a smaller, more pathetic part of me, a part I hated, felt a flicker of hope. Maybe he was calling to check on me. Maybe, just maybe, he felt a shred of brotherly concern. I answered. "Liam." "Hey, it's me." Ethan's voice was smooth, coated in a layer of what sounded like genuine sympathy. It was a sound I hadn't heard directed at me in years. "Hey." I managed to say, my own voice hoarse. "Listen, Mom told me what happened with Jessica," he said, his tone soft and practiced. "I'm so sorry, man, I really am. That's just awful. I can't imagine what you're going through." For a single stupid moment, I believed him. My defenses lowered and a wave of gratitude washed over me. He was my brother. Maybe deep down he did care. "Yeah," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "It's been a rough day." "I'll bet," Ethan said. And then the shift came. It was subtle at first, a slight change in his tone, the way a snake moves just before it strikes. "You know, I never thought Jessica was the type to give up so easily. But then again, she always was. Ambitious. She had big plans." He let the words hang in the air, a clear insinuation that I was no longer a part of any big plans. "What's that supposed to mean?" I asked, the numbness in my mind starting to recede, replaced by a cold prickle of suspicion. Nothing," he said quickly, the fake innocence in his voice more insulting than any direct attack. "It's just, a farm in Tennessee is a big change of scenery from San Diego. Not every woman is cut out for the simple life, you know. It takes a certain kind of person to appreciate, well, dirt." He chuckled, a low, condescending sound. And there it was. The mask was off. This wasn't a call of concern. It was a victory lap. "You're enjoying this, aren't you?" I said, my voice quiet but shaking with a newfound energy. "Enjoying it." "Liam, don't be like that. I'm worried about you." "What are you going to do?" he asked, his voice dripping with false pity. "I heard from Mom that Jessica even left the furniture. That's rough. But hey, look on the bright side. You won't need a sofa in a barn." Every word was designed to break me, to grind the salt deeper into the wound. He wanted me to feel exactly what I was feeling, small, pathetic, and utterly defeated. And he was succeeding. But as he spoke, something else was happening inside me. The profound sadness that had paralyzed me for hours was beginning to burn away, calcifying into something hard and hot, pure, undiluted anger. "I have to go, Ethan," I said, my voice tight. Wait before you do," he said, his voice turning playful as if he were talking to a child. I was serious. "What are you going to do?" Are you really going to go out there? Because listen, if you need a few bucks for gas to get to Tennessee, just let me know. I can spot you. It's the least I can do for my brother, the new farmer. That was it. The final perfectly aimed blow. He wasn't just my brother. He was my tormentor. He my parents, Jessica. They had all written my story for me, casting me as the tragic failure. And in that moment, sitting on the floor of my ruined life, I decided I would not play their part any longer. You know what, Ethan, I said, and my voice was no longer weak or shaky. It was cold and steady. Keep your money. You're going to need it. I hung up before he could reply. I stood up, my legs feeling steady for the first time all day. The grief was still there, but it was now a passenger. Anger was in the driver's seat. I walked over to the coffee table and picked up the deed. It no longer felt like a symbol of my humiliation. It felt like a weapon, a challenge. They all thought this piece of paper was the end of my story. I would make it the beginning. The click of the phone ending the call with Ethan was like a starting pistol. The numbness was gone. The grief was gone, all consumed by a white-hot fire of pure rage. I was a man who had been pushed, insulted, and discarded by everyone I had ever loved. They had left me with nothing but a final joke, a punchline in the form of a worthless deed. I looked at the paper in my hand, my knuckles white. They all thought this was my end. Fine, I would go see this ending for myself. There was nothing left for me in that apartment in that city. Every corner held a ghost of Jessica. Every street held a memory of a life that was no longer mine. I moved with a purpose I hadn't felt in years. I walked into the bedroom and grabbed a duffel bag from the back of the closet, the same one Jessica and I had used for weekend trips, that now felt like they belonged to another lifetime. I didn't pack methodically like she had. I just threw things in. A few pairs of jeans, some t-shirts, my work boots. It took me less than 5 minutes to pack up what was left of my life. I grabbed my wallet, my keys, and the folder containing the deed. That was it. I was done. I walked out of the apartment without a second glance. I didn't feel sadness, only a grim determination. The drive out of San Diego felt like an escape. I watched the palm trees and the sprawling perfect houses give way to the desert highways. California, the land of sunshine and dreams, disappeared in my rearview mirror. It was the world Ethan and Jessica belonged in. It was never truly mine. The road became my only companion. I drove for 2 days, fueled by cheap coffee from gas stations and a burning anger that never cooled. The landscape shifted from the scorched earth of Arizona to the flat, endless plains of Texas. Mile after mile of empty highway unfolded before me, a perfect reflection of how I felt inside. Empty, alone. At night, I'd stop at a cheap, nameless motel, the kind with flickering neon signs and sheets that felt like sandpaper. I'd lie in the dark, staring at the ceiling, the silence of the room a poor substitute for the deafening silence in my own head. And in those long, quiet hours on the road, he started to come back to me, Grandpa Arthur. His memory wasn't a comfort, not yet. It was a puzzle. I saw him sitting on the porch of that old farmhouse, his hands weathered from a lifetime of work, his eyes looking out over the fields. I could almost hear his quiet voice, a low rumble like distant thunder. This land has its own history, son. A memory surfaced, a fragment from a summer visit when I was a boy. I hadn't understood it then, and I didn't understand it now. It felt like a riddle my exhausted mind couldn't solve. Another memory flickered as I drove through a dusty town in Arkansas. Grandpa Arthur and I were fixing a fence. I had complained about how hard the work was, how much easier it would be to just buy a new one. He had stopped, looked at me with his clear, steady eyes, and said, "People only see what's on the surface, Liam. You have to look deeper. The real value is almost never the easy thing to see." The words meant nothing to me then. Now they just echoed in the emptiness of the car, a frustrating whisper from the past. Finally, I crossed the state line into Tennessee. The air changed. It grew heavier, humid, thick with the smell of damp earth and pine. The endless flat plains gave way to rolling green hills and dense forests. This was a different world, older and slower than the one I had left behind. This was his world. As I followed the winding country roads deeper into the countryside, a knot of dread and determination tightened in my stomach. I wasn't here to find answers. I wasn't here to honor a memory. I was here to perform a surgery, to cut out the last piece of my family's toxic legacy, sell it for pennies, and walk away forever. The GPS told me to turn onto a road that was more dirt than gravel. My car, a city creature used to smooth asphalt, complained loudly as it bumped and rattled over the uneven terrain. Trees crowded in on both sides, their branches like skeletal fingers scratching at my windows. After another mile, I saw it. A rusted metal gate hanging crookedly from a single hinge, half swallowed by weeds. This was it. I took a deep breath and turned onto the property. If I had held on to any tiny, foolish sliver of hope, it died the moment I saw the place. The reality was so much worse than my childhood memories or my darkest expectations. The farmhouse wasn't just old, it was a carcass. The paint had peeled away decades ago, leaving the wood underneath exposed and rotting. Windows were boarded up, and the porch sagged so dramatically in the middle it looked like it was sighing in defeat. The barn beside it was even worse, a skeletal frame with half its roof missing, looking like the ribcage of some long-dead beast. I turned off the engine, and the silence that rushed in was absolute. It wasn't a peaceful country silence, it was a dead silence. There were no birds chirping, no sounds of life. There was only the low whistle of the wind moving through the tall, dead grass. The anger that had fueled my 2-day drive across the country evaporated, leaving a cold, hollow emptiness in its place. Jessica was right. Ethan was right. This wasn't an inheritance. It was a graveyard for forgotten dreams. My feet felt heavy as I stepped out of the car. The soil crunched under my boots. It wasn't soil. It was cracked, dry clay as hard as concrete. I walked to the porch, testing the steps before putting my full weight on them. I pushed the front door. It wasn't locked. It swung inward with a long, agonizing creak, opening into a world of dust and decay. The air inside was stale thick with the smell of mold and forgotten time. Cobwebs hung from the ceiling like chandeliers in a ghost's ballroom. A few pieces of rotted furniture lay broken, covered in a thick shroud of dust. This wasn't a home. It was a tomb. I backed out, unable to breathe the dead air any longer. I stood in the yard, turning in a slow circle, taking in the full scope of the desolation. My grand inheritance, a collapsing house, a skeletal barn, and 50 acres of useless cracked earth. The humiliation I felt back in San Diego returned with a vengeance, but this time it was mixed with a profound sense of foolishness. I had driven 2,000 miles for this. I had let my anger propel me toward this final, pathetic punchline. I had to get rid of it. Now. I couldn't stand to be tied to this place for a second longer. I pulled out my phone, relieved to see a single bar of service. I quickly searched for a local land agent and dialed the first number that came up. A man with a thick southern accent answered. Robert Ford speaking. Hi, my name is Liam Peterson, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I've just inherited a property nearby, and I'm interested in selling it as quickly as possible. It's the old Arthur Peterson farm. A short, dry chuckle came from the other end of the line. Old Arthur's place, Lord's son. That place has been sitting empty since before you were born. I know it well. So what do you think it's worth? I asked, a desperate edge to my voice. He didn't even hesitate. Honestly, not much. The structures are a liability. They'll have to be torn down. The soil is no good for farming, never was. It's too rocky, and it's too far out of the way for any kind of residential development. He paused, and I could almost hear him shrugging. Look, I'll be straight with you. If you find a hunter who wants a private spot to shoot some deer, you might get $7,000 for it. And that's a big if. Most folks around here wouldn't take it if you gave it to them for free. The line went quiet. $7,000. The words hit me with the force of a physical blow. I mumbled a thank you and hung up. I stood there in the middle of my worthless inheritance, holding a phone that had just confirmed my status as the family joke. I had never felt so completely and utterly defeated. I stood there for a long time after the call, the real estate agent's dismissive laughter still echoing in my ears. $7,000. It wasn't even enough to cover a few months of my old San Diego rent. The anger that had propelled me across the country had finally burned out, leaving only the cold gray ash of despair. This whole trip was a fool's errand. I had come here driven by a pathetic need to do something, only to find out that the truth was even worse than my family's insult. This place wasn't just worthless. It was a joke, and I was the punchline. There was nothing left to do but get in my car and drive away to leave this ghost of a farm to rot in peace. As I was turning to go, a dusty pickup truck older than I was came rattling up the dirt road. It pulled to a stop beside my car, and an older man with a kind, weathered face and a full head of white hair stepped out. He wore a simple work shirt and jeans, and he moved with a slow, deliberate confidence. "Liam Peterson," he asked, his voice calm and steady. "That's me," I said, my own voice sounding tired and thin. "George Bell," he said, extending a calloused hand. His handshake was firm and honest. "We spoke on the phone a few days ago. I'm here to do the land survey for you." I had completely forgotten I had even made the appointment. In my rage and grief, the days had blurred together. "Right. Mr. Bell, thanks for coming out, but I'm not sure there's much point." George raised a thick white eyebrow. "How's that? I just got off the phone with a real estate agent," I said, the bitterness rising in my throat again. "He basically told me the land is worthless. I just need the official survey so I can unload it for whatever I can get." George didn't laugh. He didn't even smile. He just nodded slowly, his clear blue eyes scanning the property, looking past the decay, seeing something I couldn't. "Well, a job's a job. I'm here now, might as well take a look around. You don't mind if I walk the perimeter, do you?" "Knock yourself out," I said, leaning against my car, fully expecting him to be done in 5 minutes. But he wasn't. For the next hour, I watched him. He didn't just walk. He studied. He picked up handfuls of the dry soil, crumbling it between his fingers. He squinted at the rock formations jutting out of the hills in the distance. He moved with the quiet focus of a man who knew what he was looking for. He wasn't looking at the place with the dismissive glance of a developer. He was reading it like a page from a book written in a language I didn't understand. Finally, he made his way back to me, wiping his hands on his jeans. So I said, expecting the final confirmation of my failure. "As bad as it looks." He looked at me, a thoughtful expression on his face. "I knew your grandfather. You know," he said, his voice soft. "Arthur was a good man, quiet, kept to himself mostly. But he loved this land. He had a funny way of showing it," I said with a bitter scoff. George's eyes narrowed slightly. "That's a funny thing to say," he replied, his tone even. "Because your grandfather never thought this place was worthless. He was a stubborn man, your grandpa Arthur. Real stubborn." He paused, looking out over the fields again. "I can tell you over the years I've seen all sorts of folks come sniffing around this property. Developers from the city, even a few mining prospectors a while back. They made him some high offers, real high, the kind of money that could have set him up for life." My head snapped up. I stared at him, sure I had misheard. "High offers. For this?" "That's right," George said, nodding. "But he turned them all down. Every single one. Said the land had secrets worth protecting. Said it wasn't for sale, not for any price. He said it so simply, so matter-of-factly, that it struck me with an incredible force. It directly contradicted everything I had just been told, everything I had believed. Why would anyone make high offers on a worthless piece of land? And why would my grandfather, a man who had nothing, turn them down?" For the first time, a tiny crack appeared in the wall of my certainty. A seed of doubt, small and confusing, was planted in the barren soil of my despair. George seemed to sense my confusion. "Well," he said, clapping his hands together, "I'll head back to the office and come back tomorrow with the proper equipment to get you that official report." He gave me a final thoughtful look, tipped his hat, and got back in his truck, leaving me alone once more in the dead silence of the farm. But this time the silence felt different. It was no longer empty. It was filled with a question. I didn't sleep that night. George Bell's words replayed in my mind on an endless loop. High offers. Real high. Secrets worth protecting. It made no sense. I walked the perimeter of the property as the sun went down, staring at the cracked earth and the skeletal barn, trying to see what my grandfather had seen, what those mysterious buyers had seen. But I saw nothing. Nothing but decay and failure. By morning, I had convinced myself that George was just a sentimental old man romanticizing the memory of his friend. The real estate agent was right. The land was worthless. The offers were probably just local legends, stories that grow taller with each telling. I was a fool for letting a flicker of hope take root in my mind. Hope was a luxury I couldn't afford. I spent the morning sitting on the sagging porch of the farmhouse waiting. I had decided that as soon as George gave me the official report confirming the land's worthlessness, I would call the agent back, accept his insulting offer, and get out of Tennessee for good. I just wanted it to be over. Around noon, I saw his dusty pickup truck rattling up the road again. I felt a knot of anxiety tighten in my stomach. This was it. The final verdict. George parked but didn't get out right away. He just sat there for a moment looking at some papers on a clipboard. When he finally did step out of the truck, his friendly demeanor from the day before was gone. He walked towards me with the slow, solemn gait of a doctor about to deliver bad news. His face was serious, his lips set in a thin, grim line. "Liam," he said, his voice flat and professional. He didn't offer a handshake this time. "George," I replied, my own voice tense. "So, what's the official word? Is it as bad as it looks?" He avoided my eyes, looking down at the clipboard in his hands instead. "I've got the full geological survey and soil composition analysis right here," he said, tapping the papers with his finger. "I've been over the data 3 times this morning. I've even run it past a colleague at the state university to be sure." He was stalling. My stomach dropped. And I pushed, needing him to just rip the Band-Aid off. He finally looked up, and his eyes were filled with what I could only describe as pity. "Son, I'm sorry," he said, and the words were heavy with finality. "It's worse than we thought. The soil composition is, well, it's a complete anomaly." I just stared at him, my mind refusing to process what he was saying. From an agricultural standpoint, he continued, his voice leaving no room for argument. "This land is completely, irrevocably useless. The pH levels are a disaster, but that's not the main problem. The ground is saturated with unusually high concentrations of certain contaminants." Contaminants. I repeated the word, tasting like poison. "Heavy metal oxides," he said, reading from his report. "Lanthanum, cerium, neodymium. A whole cocktail of them. In these concentrations, they're toxic to almost all plant life. It explains why nothing has ever grown here. It's why the soil is so hard and cracked. Nothing will ever grow here, Liam. Ever." Each technical term he listed was another shovel of dirt on the coffin of my last hope. I felt dizzy, the world tilting slightly on its axis. I had been a fool, a complete and utter fool. "So there's nothing," I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "It's good for nothing at all." George looked at me with that same sad pity. "For farming, for building a house. Son, I'm sorry to be the one to tell you this, but this land isn't just a write-off. It's a liability." The air went out of my lungs. A liability. Not just worthless, but less than worthless. My grand inheritance was a patch of toxic ground. My family hadn't just given me their garbage. They had given me their poison. The word liability hung in the humid Tennessee air between us. It was a final, brutal judgment on my life. I actually stumbled back a step, my legs suddenly weak, and leaned against the dusty hood of my car for support. I felt a laugh bubble up in my chest, a hysterical, broken sound. It was all so perfectly cruel, so poetic in its injustice. Of course, this was my inheritance. Of course it was worse than worthless. This was the final chapter of my life as Liam Peterson, the family failure. I dropped my head into my hands, the sun beating down on my neck. I didn't have the energy to be angry anymore. All I had left was a profound, soul-crushing emptiness. My entire life had been a mistake. "I'm sorry, son," George said again, his voice soft with a pity that felt like salt in a wound. I just shook my head, not looking at him. "It's fine," I mumbled. "It's not your fault. It's what I expected." I finally looked up at him, my eyes burning. "Well, thanks for your time, George. I guess I'll just leave it here to rot." I expected him to nod, to get in his truck and drive away, leaving me to my misery. But he didn't move. He just stood there watching me, his expression slowly changing. The pity in his eyes faded, replaced by something else, something I couldn't quite read. It was a keen, analytical look, the same one he'd had when he was studying the soil. "You know, Liam," he said, his voice taking on a new, thoughtful tone, "from a certain point of view, everything I told you is the absolute truth." He paused, letting the strange sentence hang in the air. "But there's another point of view." I stared at him, confused. "What are you talking about? You just said the land was toxic. Poisoned." "It is," he said, a slow smile beginning to form at the corners of his mouth. "But you know what they say. One man's poison is another man's treasure." He took a step closer, his eyes gleaming with a sudden infectious excitement. "Let me ask you a question. Those contaminants I mentioned, lanthanum, cerium, neodymium, do those names mean anything to you?" "No," I said, shaking my head. "Should they?" "To a farmer? No. To a construction worker like you, probably not. But to a tech engineer in Silicon Valley, to a defense contractor at the Pentagon, to the CEO of an electric car company, to them, those names are more precious than gold." He let that sink in. I was still lost my mind, struggling to keep up. "Liam," he said, his voice dropping to an almost conspiratorial whisper. "Those aren't just random heavy metals. What you have here saturating this entire 50-acre property is one of the richest deposits of rare earth elements anyone has ever seen in this part of the country." The words didn't register at first. Rare earth elements. It sounded like something from a science fiction movie. "I don't understand," I said, my voice hoarse. "Your phone," he said, pointing at the device in my hand. "The screen, the battery, the vibration motor, it's all powered by those elements. The satellites orbiting the Earth, the guidance systems in missiles, the magnets in the turbines that generate wind power, it all runs on the very poison that makes this ground so useless for farming." The modern world. Liam is built on the stuff you're standing on right now. My knees felt weak again, but for a completely different reason. My mind reeled, trying to connect the dots. The high offers, the mining prospectors, my grandfather's stubborn refusal to sell. His words echoed in my head, suddenly crystal clear. This land has secrets worth protecting. The real value is almost never the easy thing to see. My grandfather, did he know? I whispered the question, hanging in the air. "He knew," George said with a firm nod. He wasn't a geologist, but he was no fool. He knew this land was special. He knew those companies weren't offering him millions for a place to hunt deer. They wanted what was underneath it. And he didn't trust them. He was protecting it. Not from the world's sun. For you. The scale of it, the sheer magnitude of the truth was too much to take in all at once. My entire reality had been shattered and rebuilt in the span of 5 minutes. I looked out at the decaying farmhouse, the skeletal barn, the cracked, worthless soil. I had seen a graveyard, a symbol of my failure, but I was wrong. I was looking at it with my family's eyes, with Jessica's eyes. I wasn't seeing what my grandfather saw. This wasn't a punishment. It was a test, a sacred trust. He hadn't given the obvious wealth, the million-dollar home, to the son who chased success. He had given the real legacy, the hidden kingdom, to the grandson he believed had the character to be its guardian. So, what is it worth? I finally asked, the words feeling foreign on my tongue. George let out a low whistle. The real estate agent told you $7,000, right? He said with a wry smile. Well, based on my preliminary survey and the current market value for these elements, Liam, you're not standing on a farm. You're standing on a vault. A conservative estimate. You're looking at a 9-figure number, maybe more. 9 figures, hundreds of millions of dollars. The number was so vast, so impossible, that it didn't feel real. I looked down at the deed still clutched in my hand. It was no longer a symbol of humiliation. It was a crown, a key. It was the last will and testament of a man who saw me, who believed in me when no one else did. In that moment, standing in the middle of that forgotten field, I finally understood. The worst day of my life had just become the beginning of everything. I just stared at George, my mind a whirlwind of impossible numbers and earth-shattering revelations. 9 figures. It was a concept so far beyond my reality that I couldn't grasp it. A few hours ago, I was a man who worried about making rent, a man whose wife had left him over a perceived lack of financial future. Now I was standing on ground that was worth more than my entire family's empire, more than everything Ethan had ever achieved. The world had tilted on its axis, and I was struggling to find my balance. I looked from the decaying farmhouse to the cracked soil, then back to George's steady, honest face. I don't know what to do. I stammered the first honest words I could form. I don't know the first thing about any of this. George gave me a reassuring smile. That's all right, son. Nobody expects you to. But the first thing you need to understand is that news like this in my line of work travels fast. My colleague at the university who confirmed my findings, he's one of the top geologists in the state. People listen to him. The vultures will start circling sooner than you think. He pulled out his own phone. There's a company, Geocorp Industries. They're the biggest player in rare earth mining in North America. They're aggressive, but they're legitimate. My contact there owes me a favor. Do you want me to make a call? Just to see what the first move on the chessboard looks like? I was still in a daze, but I nodded. It felt like the only thing to do. I needed this to be real. I needed to hear it from someone else. George dialed a number, and a moment later, a crisp professional voice answered on speakerphone. David Chen. David, it's George Bell down in Tennessee, George said. George, good to hear from you. What can I do for you? Found another hidden gem for us, the voice on the phone said, a hint of friendly challenge in his tone. You could say that George set a slight smile playing on his lips. I'm standing on a 50-acre property unlisted privately owned. My initial survey shows unprecedented concentrations of lanthanum cerium and a significant deposit of neodymium. It's the old Peterson farm, if that means anything to you. There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line, followed by a moment of dead silence. The friendly tone was gone, replaced by one of intense, focused interest. Are you serious, George? The Peterson property? We thought that was a lost cause. Old man Arthur wouldn't even let our surveyors on the land. Well, Arthur's gone, George said quietly, and his grandson is standing right here beside me. Another pause. I could almost hear the gears turning in David Chen's head, the calculations being run. Put him on, he commanded. George handed me the phone. My hand was shaking. Hello, I said. Mr. Peterson, David Chen. I'm the head of acquisitions for GeoCorp. I want to be the first to congratulate you on your inheritance. His voice was smooth as silk, but carried an undeniable urgency. We are extremely interested in your property, so interested in fact that I am authorized to make you an immediate, on-the-spot offer to show our good faith. $5 million. Cash. We can have a geological team on site by Friday, and the money will be in an account of your choosing by Monday morning. No hassle, no lawyers, just a clean, simple deal. $5 million. The number exploded in my brain. It was a life raft. It was a vindication. It was more money than I had ever dreamed of seeing. I could buy a house that would make my parents' place look like a shack. I could buy a car that would make Ethan's look like a toy. I could go back to San Diego, find Jessica, and show her the life she had thrown away. All I had to do was say yes. It was the easy way out, the safe bet. But then I thought of my grandfather. I thought of him standing on this very porch turning down offers just like this one. Why he wasn't a fool. He knew he was sitting on a fortune, but he chose to live a simple life to protect this land. He didn't sell out to the first person who came knocking. He was guarding something more than just money. He was guarding a legacy of self-respect. He was guarding the family's true worth. He had trusted me with that legacy. If I took this first offer, this low-ball offer made to a man they thought was ignorant and desperate, I would be betraying that trust. I would be proving that I was exactly the man my family thought I was, someone who would sell his birthright for a quick payday. I took a deep breath, the humid Tennessee air filling my lungs. For the first time, it felt like my air, my land, my decision. Mr. Chen, I said, and my voice was steady, clear, and calm. Thank you for the generous offer, but the answer is no. This land is not for sale at this time. I heard a sputtering sound of disbelief on the other end of the line before I pressed the red button to end the call. I handed the phone back to George. He looked at me, a slow, proud smile spreading across his face. In that moment, I wasn't just a man who had inherited a fortune. I was a man who had finally inherited his own worth. The days that followed were the clearest of my life. The storm of confusion and shock had passed, leaving behind a calm, quiet sense of purpose. George Bell became my guide, my mentor. He brought out old survey maps and geological charts, and together we would walk the 50 acres of my inheritance. He taught me how to read the land, to understand the subtle shifts in the terrain that hinted at the riches sleeping below. He told me stories about my grandfather, about his quiet wisdom and his unshakable integrity. For the first time, I felt a connection not just to the land, but to the man who had protected it for me. I was no longer just Liam the construction worker. I was Arthur Peterson's grandson, the guardian of his legacy. I spent my days doing simple work, clearing away the dead brush from the front of the house, boarding up the broken windows, patching a small section of the barn roof. They were small acts, but they were acts of ownership. I was breathing life back into the place, and in return, it was breathing life back into me. I was on the porch replacing a rotting floorboard when I heard it. A low, powerful hum that didn't belong. It wasn't a tractor or a pickup truck. It was the sound of a high-end German engine, a sound I knew from my brother's world, not mine. I stood up, my hammer in my hand, and watched as a sleek black Mercedes sedan, freshly washed and gleaming, made its way slowly and awkwardly up my dirt road. It looked like a panther that had wandered into a swamp, completely out of its element. The car stopped in the yard, its polished chrome a vulgar contrast to the rustic decay of the farm. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the driver's side door opened. Ethan stepped out. He wore a tailored suit, no tie, looking like he had just come from a high-powered lunch meeting. He surveyed the property, his eyes filled not with the disgust I expected, but with a hungry, calculating gleam. He looked at the dilapidated farmhouse as if he were mentally calculating its demolition cost and the profit margins of the land it stood on. Then the back door opened, and my father and mother emerged. They looked lost and uncomfortable, squinting in the bright Tennessee sun. My mother clutched her purse like a shield, her city shoes ill-equipped for the dusty ground. They wouldn't meet my eyes. They were here as reinforcements, not as parents. My heart was pounding a hard, steady drum against my ribs. I knew this was coming, but I wasn't prepared for the final blow. The passenger door opened, and Jessica stepped out. She was wearing a beautiful sundress. Her hair was perfect, and a gentle, apologetic smile was fixed on her face. It was the same smile she used to charm my parents. The sight of her standing there beside my brother, a united front of betrayal and greed, hit me harder than any of her angry words had. They had all come. My entire former life assembled in my front yard to stake their claim. They stood there for a moment in a tense, silent line, the four of them looking at me. I stood on the porch of my house on my land. I was covered in sweat and dirt, my hands were calloused from the work I'd been doing, and I'm sure I looked like the very farmer Jessica had so scornfully described. But I wasn't hunched over in shame. I stood tall, the hammer still held loosely in my hand. I was no longer the guest in their world. They were the intruders in mine. Finally, my mother broke the suffocating silence, taking a tentative step forward. "Liam, honey," she said, her voice strained with false sweetness. "We were so worried. We came as soon as we heard. We need to talk." I looked at my mother's strained, hopeful face, then let my eyes travel to my father's awkward posture, my brother's impatient greed, and finally to the practiced remorse on Jessica's face. They looked like a delegation from a foreign country, completely alien to the new world I now inhabited. I wiped the sweat from my brow with the back of my hand, leaving a streak of dirt. "You're right, Mom," I said, my voice calm and even. It didn't even feel like my own voice. It was stronger, more grounded. "We should talk. Why don't you all come up on the porch?" It wasn't a request. It was an invitation into my space on my terms. They exchanged uncertain glances before cautiously making their way up the creaking steps, each one of them looking around at the peeling paint and dusty floorboards with barely concealed disgust. I remained standing, leaning against a porch column while they arranged themselves awkwardly on the top step. Ethan, ever the man of action, broke the silence first. He dispensed with any pretense of family concern. "All right, let's cut the drama," he snapped, his voice sharp with impatience. "I got a call from a guy at Geocorp, Liam. He told me you turned down a $5 million offer. $5 million? Are you out of your mind? You have no idea what you're doing. This is a family asset, and you are going to blow it with your incompetence." He took a step towards me, his finger jabbing in the air. "I'm here to take over. We'll form a trust with me as the executor, obviously. I'll handle the negotiations and we'll split the profits 4 ways. It's the only logical thing to do." Before I could respond, my father chimed in, placing a placating hand on Ethan's shoulder. "Now, son, what your brother means is that we need to be fair about this," he said, his voice weak and pleading. "This is an unexpected situation for all of us. When we gave you the farm, we never intended for there to be such an imbalance. We just want what's fair for the whole family." "That's right, Liam," my mother added, her eyes welling up with crocodile tears. "We are a family. We can't let money tear us apart. We love you and Ethan equally. We just want to make sure everyone is taken care of." "Love." The word sounded so hollow coming from her lips. Then Jessica made her move. She glided past my parents and Ethan, stopping right in front of me. She gently placed her hand on my arm, the same arm she had refused to touch just days ago. "Liam, honey," she whispered, her voice overflowing with a sweetness that made my stomach turn. I was a fool. I was scared and hurt, and I said things I will regret for the rest of my life. "Seeing you here taking charge, this is the man I always knew you were. I miss you. I miss us. We can have it all now. The life we always dreamed of together." I listened to them all one by one. I listened to their demands, their manipulations, their lies, and I felt nothing. No anger, no pain, only a profound, quiet clarity. When they were finally finished, a tense silence fell over the porch. 4 pairs of eyes were fixed on me, waiting for my answer, expecting the same old weak Liam to crumble. I looked at Ethan. "You're right about one thing," I said calmly. "I don't know the first thing about mining, but Grandpa Arthur knew about character, and he knew you only cared about the bottom line. That's why he didn't give this land to you. It was never meant to be a business transaction." I turned to my parents. "And you talk about fairness. Was it fair when you handed Ethan $1.5 million home and gave me what you thought was a pile of garbage? Your definition of fairness only seems to apply when I'm the one with something you want. This inheritance wasn't about being fair. It was about trust, a concept I don't think you understand." Finally, I looked at Jessica. I gently removed her hand from my arm. "You were wrong about so much, Jess," I said, my voice soft but firm. "But you were right when you said you didn't sign up to be a farmer's wife. What I've realized is that you never signed up to be my wife either. You were just waiting to see if your investment in me would pay off. It didn't, so you cashed out. But the stock has gone up now and you want back in. I'm sorry, but that position has been filled." I took a deep breath and addressed all of them, my voice ringing with a finality that left no room for negotiation. "This land is mine. It's mine not because my name is on a deed, but because my grandfather trusted me with it. He trusted me to protect it, to honor it, and to not sell it to the first vulture that came circling. You are all welcome to your lives in San Diego. But they end where this property line begins." I pointed out to the dusty road. "I think it's time for you all to leave." They stared at me, their faces a mixture of shock, disbelief, and fury. For the first time in their lives, they had no power over me. They had nothing to offer, nothing to threaten me with. They were bankrupt. Without another word, they turned a silent, defeated procession and got back into their shiny black car. I watched them drive away, kicking up a cloud of dust until they were just a speck in the distance. And as they disappeared, I felt the last chains of my old life fall away, leaving me standing free alone on my own ground. The dust from their Mercedes settled long after the sound of its engine had faded, leaving behind a silence that was deeper and more profound than before. It wasn't an empty silence anymore. It was a peaceful one. I stood on that sagging porch for a long time, watching the sun begin its slow descent, painting the Tennessee sky in hues of orange and purple. The air, which had once felt heavy with decay, now felt clean and full of promise. I was alone, truly alone for the first time in my life, yet I had never felt less lonely. The ghosts of my past had been exorcised. They had come to my home, played their last cards, and had left with nothing. That night, I didn't sleep in my car. I went inside the old farmhouse. I found a broom and swept away decades of dust from a small corner of the living room floor. I used my duffel bag as a pillow and lay there in the quiet darkness, looking up at the ceiling where patches of moonlight filtered through the broken roof. For the first time, I didn't see a ruin. I saw a project. I saw potential. I saw a home. The house wasn't haunted by the past. It was waiting for a future. My future. I woke before dawn. A cool, misty air had settled over the land. I walked out onto the porch and watched as the first rays of sunlight broke over the rolling hills, illuminating the fields that I now saw with completely new eyes. I saw where a new fence could go, where the old barn could be rebuilt, not for livestock, but as a workshop. I saw the farmhouse restored to its former simple glory, a place of peace and solitude. My inheritance wasn't just the minerals buried deep in the earth. It was the 50 acres of possibility on the surface. The fortune beneath my feet was a tool, a powerful one. It would give me freedom, security. But I knew with a certainty that resonated in my very bones that the money itself wasn't the prize. The real prize was the man I had been forced to become in order to claim it. A man who could stand up to his family's greed. A man who could walk away from a toxic love. A man who could turn down $5 million because he knew his grandfather's trust was worth more. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a text from George. GeoCorp called me again. They've upped their offer to $20 million. The vultures are getting hungry. A week ago, that number would have sent my world spinning. Now I just smiled. I texted back, "Tell them I'm not selling. I'm building." I knew the path forward wouldn't be easy. There would be lawyers to hire, geologists to consult, and a whole new world of business to learn. I would have to be smart, careful, and patient, just like Grandpa Arthur had been. I wouldn't sell the mining rights away to the first bidder. I would partner with the right people, people who respected the land. I would create a foundation in my grandfather's name to help restore other forgotten pieces of American farmland. I would use this incredible gift not just to enrich myself, but to build something that would last, something that would honor the man who had given it to me. The sun was fully above the horizon now, bathing the entire farm in a warm, golden light. The dead grass looked like a field of gold. The rotting wood of the barn looked like a noble skeleton waiting for new life. I was no longer Liam Peterson, the failure from San Diego. That man had died in this very yard. I was Liam Peterson, the guardian of Arthur's legacy. I had spent my entire life feeling like I was in the wrong place, a spare part in my own family's story. But standing here on this unwanted, forgotten, and secretly priceless piece of land, I knew I was finally home. The journey hadn't been about coming to Tennessee. It had been about coming into my own. True value isn't given, it's discovered. My family saw a plot of worthless land, but my grandfather saw my character. He didn't hand me wealth, he trusted me with a secret. The world may judge you by what you have, but your real legacy is defined by who you are.